Hey, welcome to this video. On this one, I'm going to discuss a question that comes up from time to time is how I got involved in chiropractic. And I was actually the first person in my family to go to a chiropractor when I was a young teenager. Now, I had started out being diagnosed with scoliosis, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a sideways curvature of the spine. And you've probably heard of them doing scoliosis screenings in the school. Well, one of those scoliosis screenings caught the fact that I had a sideways curvature developing. I think it was about 11 years old when that happened. So initially what happened is I went to an orthopedist, and I was seeing one of the top orthopedists in Miami, Florida. And in fact, he was the team doctor for the Miami Dolphins. And his approach was basically, well, we're going to put a lift in the shoe and we're going to, kind of watch it and come back in 6 months and we'll see how it's doing. And we did that for a couple of years, and curve was gradually getting worse. And doctors like, well, it's still not bad enough to put you in a brace. So we'll wait a little bit longer and come back in 6 months. And my parents got a little frustrated with that. They were a little concerned that I was going to need to be put in a brace and how that was going to affect things. And possibly if that didn't work, I might have to have surgery down the line. And they were a little bit frustrated with the fact that we were just kind of letting it go that direction. So at one point during this, a friend of my mother's suggested we see her chiropractor and see what he could offer. And my parents were both pretty skeptical of chiropractic, to say the least, and to say, they really thought of us as quacks back then. So they were hesitant, but they were also frustrated with the orthopedist. So they decided, okay, let's go see what this guy has to say, and we can go from there. It doesn't hurt to at least find out. So we went in. I saw Dr. Paul Fisher in Miami, and Dr. Fisher checked things out. He explained his approach, that he was going to be working on correcting the function of the spinal joints, and he was going to give me some exercises to balance out some of the muscle imbalances that were associated with the scoliosis. And that once we'd gotten into this, he would kind of keep an eye on things fairly frequently to see what's happening with the curve. Long story short, after I think it was about 6 or 8 weeks, on the follow-up X-rays, the curve was already starting to reduce. And in fact, it was substantially reduced, probably down about 30%. And so my parents were pretty happy about that. And so eventually, I continued, and eventually my curvature was reduced down to about 2 degrees, which is not even really considered scoliosis anymore. It's kind of a subclinical condition. Now, that's great, and it was impressive, and it was a great thing for my family in and of itself. But that's not where the story ends. My father had polio as a child, and he had the rather severe type of polio that causes nerve damage, and he had actually muscle wasting in one leg because of neurological damage. He had a very severe scoliosis where he actually had a double 45-degree curve, where his curve went 45 degrees one way and 45 degrees back the other way. To give you an idea of what that does, his spine actually went under the edge of his right shoulder blade. So that's quite a bit of distortion in the spine and the skeleton. Now, as you might imagine, that creates a lot of muscle tension, and he would have a lot of pain. Especially, he would get these periods of time where everything would spasm up. He couldn't move, and he was basically confined to a bed, and that could be a week or so at a time. And as he was getting older, that was becoming more and more frequent. At the time I started seeing the chiropractor, he was having those episodes 3, 4, 5 times a year. And as somebody who was self-employed as a consulting engineer and an accident investigator, he couldn't afford to be laid up for a week at a time, multiple times a year. So he had been to various doctors, a couple different orthopedists. Basically, the treatment was when he'd have one of those really severe episodes to take some Valium and lie on a heating pad and stay in bed until you could get up and move around. So seeing the success that the chiropractor had with my scoliosis, he asked Dr. Fisher, he said, Doc, you've done such a great job with George. Do you think you could do something to correct my curvature? And I remember Dr. Fisher's answer still today. He looked at me, he says, Mr. Best, he said, I'm good. That's the word with two O's, not one. I don't think I or anybody else can correct your curvature. However, I think I can make you feel better. And that's really what my father was looking for. He really wanted just to not have severe pain on a frequent basis throughout his life. So he decided to start as a patient as well, and had excellent results fairly quickly into his treatment. He was feeling better immediately. And really from the time he started seeing Dr. Fisher, for the rest of his life, he only had a couple of episodes of severe back spasms. That's a couple of episodes over decades as opposed to 3, 4, 5 times a year. And when he did have the episodes, he'd go see Dr. Fisher and usually be back in business within 2, 3 days. So cut down the duration of it considerably as well. Over the years, my father decided that chiropractic was his real insurance policy, and so he used it on a maintenance basis, which some people do, some people don't. It is something I offer, it's not something I require. But my father felt that it was very much worth it for his situation because he did have, obviously the neurological problems and the extreme curvature in his spine. And he found that periodic chiropractic, he would go every couple of weeks or so, kept him from having any major problems. The other thing I want to point out is that when I was in chiropractic school, they told us that people with severe scoliosis, like my father, typically have shortened lifespans. In fact, the lifespan is usually somewhere in the 50 to 60 year range because they tend to develop a lot of heart and lung problems due to the constriction of the skeleton due to the distortion. So when you have all that stuff curving and everything, it kind of squeezes in on the heart and lungs. Well, my father never did develop heart or lung problems, and he lived to his early 80s. So I don't know whether chiropractic had anything to do with him having a pretty long life, but he certainly did better than most people with his degree of scoliosis do. So after my father's experience, my mother also started going, and she had rheumatoid arthritis for many years, found that chiropractic, along with taking various supplements, helped her rheumatoid arthritis more than medication ever did. And I've had a couple of sisters, and both of them have been to chiropractors. One of them got quite a bit of benefit for some long-standing injuries from car accidents. So, the long story, kind of shortish, is that my family has benefited quite a bit as chiropractic patients. And I don't want to try to say that chiropractic is going to fix everything for everybody. That's not the way it works. But it is beneficial for a great many things. And, seeing what my experience as well as my other family members got out of it, that's what made me decide to become a chiropractor. So that's my story. Hopefully I didn't go on too long and get too boring with it, but that's why I'm a chiropractor today.